Good morning, everyone.
Can you hear me now?
Welcome to an all-new Artsbeat. This is Mark Auerbach, your host. Ken Stomsky's our chief engineer. And it's the end of the year, and what better than to recap the theater year in review. Tim Leninger, who is the blogger for One Man's Opinion, which is one of my favorite go-tos now to read reviews of Broadway and Connecticut theater, is here with us, and we may have other guests showing up during the course of the hour. Tim, it's good to see you.
Hello, how are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well. You've covered so much theater this year, and unfortunately for me, the first time I went to the theater in several months was to see Moulin Rouge at the Bushnell. Prior to that, I saw To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was the extent of my theater going in 2023, much to my chagrin. But you've seen everything, primarily in Connecticut, but also on Broadway and maybe in some of the Berkshire and theaters around. But as we recap the year, I'm sure you're doing your year-end recaps for some of your sources. I just wrote one which runs Christmas Day in the Westfield News and Mass Live. And it's really difficult to recap the best of everything and some of the history of everything. But a couple of milestones that occurred to me. This was the 60th anniversary of both Goodspeed Musicals and Hartford Stage. And in the world of theater, 60 years is a milestone, particularly when theaters around the country are folding post-pandemic because they haven't been able to maintain their donor base or their audience base. But these are two regional theaters that have been around 60 years and left a major imprint and impact on theaters around the country because they produce shows that go elsewhere. I can't count the number of Goodspeed musicals that have gone on to Broadway, but among them are Man of La Mancha and Annie and Irving Berlin's White Christmas. And Hartford Stage had its share, too. A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder went from Hartford Stage to Broadway and picked up a Tony. And a year later, Anastasia, the musical, started in Hartford and went on to a great Broadway run. And a couple of years ago, they did John Leguizamo's Kiss My Aztec, which was hilariously funny. And my understanding is it has Broadway intentions for not this season, but possibly next. Tim, what were the high points on Broadway for you this year?
Well, excuse me. Well, the high point for me in New York was actually off Broadway with the revival of Merrily We Roll Along, which is now on Broadway. I saw it off Broadway back in like January or February at the beginning of this year when I was playing at New York Theater Workshop, and I loved it. And it's also now on Broadway and selling out, and ticket prices for are astronomical. Granted, the cast has a big thing to do with it, with Jonathan Groff and Lindsay Mendez and Daniel Radcliffe. But I think it's just a show that we are ready for now, which, back when it premiered, it just wasn't that. It needed time to I think it needed time for us as an audience to be able to appreciate it.
I went to the original production, the last performance, the last Saturday matinee. I was living in New Haven at the time, and the word of mouth was on the street that it had a great score and was absolutely awful. And I was a Sondheim junkie, and a friend and I took the Metro North to Grand Central, went to the matinee, and I couldn't wait to buy the cast album, but I also couldn't wait to leave the theater. It was excruciatingly bad production. And years later, I saw a revival of it at Arena Stage, and Sondheim and George, I can't remember who wrote the book, but Sondheim wrote the music and lyrics, and they were reconstructing it for Arena Stage. And instead of using teenagers in the cast, they were using older people. And parts of it worked really well. Then there was a
George Firth.
George Firth, that's right. And then there was a revival in New York at Encores, which produces shows in concert that might have not been a hit the first time around, and I fell in love with it. Maybe because I was older and not of the age at the beginning of the show when they're on the rooftop looking at the launch of Sputnik and they're young, idealistic 20-year-olds. And the show, to me, is fascinating because it moves backwards in time from the present to their young adulthood. And you see these three friends and the mistakes that they made in their lives, which drew them apart over the years. But the score is wonderful. I could sit and listen to that day in and day out.
It's one of Sondheim's best, absolutely. Funny enough, I saw one of Sondheim's worst the other weekend. When I went and saw Here We Are, which I wish they just shelved it.
I've heard that. But it amazes me. He's been dead for 2 years. He has a new show off Broadway. He has Sweeney Todd, which is probably his most successful show, and Merrily, both running on Broadway right now. Company is touring on a national tour, as is Into the Woods. And his works get done more in death than most contemporary composers that are living.
There's also a show in London right now that is like a best of hits of Sondheim musical that's going on. A review. This is a Sondheim review going on in London at the moment with Bernadette Peters. That'll probably come here to New York also.
I'm sure it will. What resonates in you about Sondheim that would put him on your best list year after year?
For me personally, he's an extension of the brilliance of 20th century songwriting. There is a clear line of composition and starting with Aaron Copland and going to Leonard Bernstein, who Aaron Copland was a mentor of, and then Leonard Bernstein was a mentor to Stephen Sondheim. And Sondheim is just the natural extension of the brilliance of 20th century American composers. And I love his stuff. There's a Sunday in the Park with George is my favorite show of his. And then there's Company and Merrily. Those are my big three. His ability to have a variety of themes and melodies that capture the moments and the essence of the characters and the story. It's almost always, when he succeeds, it's very robust and rich and full of color and character.
This last summer, when I was off my feet and recuperating from an illness, I spent a lot of time listening to music because I was lying flat on my back and couldn't read or sit up long enough, and watching television or a video screen was too much. And so a friend of mine brought all of my Sondheim CDs, which I could put into my player, and I rediscovered Saturday Night, which was the first musical he wrote. It never got produced on Broadway because the producer died right before it was supposed to go into rehearsal. And he was an unknown, and so was the book writer. But it has a really nice score for a very beginning composer-lyricist whose only credits after that time were as the lyricist of West Side Story and Gypsy. He hadn't really written musicals for the stage. It's got a brilliant little score for what it is. And I enjoyed it. And I'm enamored with a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, which was his first commercial success. But subsequent to that, Company resonates with me. Follies resonates with me in a big way. And Sweeney Todd. And I could sit and listen to the music or see productions of these over and over and over again and never get bored.
Right. Now, and you think of like some of his like things like Evening Primrose, or you can even look at the Frogs. He's got some very fascinating pieces out there that just And we haven't even mentioned Into the Woods, which had a marvelous revival about a year and a half
Yeah,
ago.
it's on tour. It was just in Boston. I don't know where else it'll be, but area theaters produce it all the time. Playhouse on Park put it on out in the woods during the pandemic.
Hmm.
It's been done all over the map.
Yeah. Oh, the thing is that Sondheim never shied away from controversial issues, and I think and and I think that kind of makes it difficult. But first of all, his songwriting is very complex and challenging. Uh, Odd meters, syncopations, bizarre harmonies that are really hard for companies for amateur companies and some regional companies to do. And I'm thrilled when somebody pulls it off and makes it sound great.
A couple of years ago, there was a theater company up here called K&E Theater, and they did Assassins. And I had seen Assassins before a couple of times. The first time I saw it was at a community theater in Hartford. I can't remember the name of the theater, but it's long gone.
Hmm.
I think it was called the Producing Guild or something like that. But Assassins is a really tough show to sit through in terms of what it says, but the music is drawn from the American folk music idioms from the time of the Civil War to the present time. There's a song in it that could have been a Carpenter's hit called
Hmm.
Unworthy of Your Love.
Yeah.
The music and lyrics are brilliant. They're hummable in their own way. And the subject matter was so dark and so bizarre that you were uncomfortable sitting in it.
But
But
it
you walked,
should.
that was his point. And you walked away
Exactly.
going, wow, this was quite the experience, particularly in a song called Another National Anthem, which is this group of presidential assassins and wannabes singing about their goals in life, which are not that much different than our goals in life, but they're
Right.
just coming from a different angle and a different way to solve the nation's problems. What a
Right.
brilliant piece of music.
Now we were talking about some of the other Broadway stuff that I've seen that I really like this year. I mean, as much as I love Sondheim, and we could do a whole hour show on Sondheim, but when I think of like some of the other, the spring was kind of not all that great, but there were a couple highlights. Like Goodnight Oscar was a fantastic play, and Sean Hayes was marvelous. The biggest Prima Facie was a wonderful solo piece. That was awesome. Um, but the big surprise for me was Shucked. I went into Shucked with such a low bar, and I left going, "Wow, this was so much better than I ever anticipated."
And unfortunately, it's closing, but I understand it's going to be available for community theaters. It's
It
kind
should
of
be.
it's sort of like a hee haw of sorts, and it's all corny jokes about corn. But
Yeah.
I've heard the recording, and there is one knockout song in it, sung by Alex Newell, who won the Tony Award for Shucked,
Hmm.
called "Independently Owned." You go find it on YouTube. That is one brilliant performance.
Yeah. I, the way I think I described it in my review is like, yeah, it's like Hee Haw meets 110 in the Shade, because because the premise is very similar to 110 in the Shade, or The Rainmaker, if you know the play that it's based off of, because it's got the same premise to it. But it is so silly and so chock full of puns that, yeah, you kind of need, you got to have a flavor for that. You got to have a palate for that kind of humor. But if you do, it is so hysterical.
We got to take a break, Tim, to acknowledge our underwriters. Before we do, Tim is the writer of One Man's Opinion, which is available on YouTube. How can people find you on YouTube? And I know that if you like what he does, you can support One Man's Opinion on Patreon.
Yes, just look up One Man's Opinion on YouTube. It'll come up. It's the first thing you'll probably hit.
Yeah,
And
you picked a
there's
good name for your podcast. You do write for other papers besides that. So if people wanted to read you in print, where would they find you?
I write for the Connecticut Examiner. It's a Shoreline online publication. I actually just interviewed Nick Fradiani, who is the replacement for Neil Diamond in Beautiful Noise. and there's going to be an article of my interview with him that's going to be posted soon, if not already up.
Terrific. We can take a fast break to acknowledge our underwriters, and then Tim and I will be back to talk about more of the best of theater for 2023 in our region. Ken Stomsky's our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. Don't go away.
Support for community radio on WSKB provided by Westfield Electroplating. Employing over 140 skilled platers, painters, and technicians, Westfield Electroplating was founded in 1946 and was the first company in the country to achieve National Aerospace and Defense Contractor Program accreditation, proudly maintaining that status for over a decade. Westfield Electroplating provides over 50 quality finishes to meet your corrosion, cosmetic, or performance needs. On the web at www.westfieldplating.com or 413-568-3716. Westfield Electroplating, putting the finishing touches on technology.
Saturdays were made for polka. Tune in to the Polka Jammer Network starting at 6 a.m. and Polka Hall of Famer Billy Bellina, Breakfast at BB at 8:30.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. If you missed a part of today's program or you want to watch it again, share it with friends, what have you, it's archived on YouTube on WSKB Community Radio, along with all of our shows this year and years previous. So Tim and I have done several programs together. He's one of my favorite guests. And you can go back and see how we looked in 2022, 2021, and all that if you go to our archives on YouTube. Tim, Ken Stomsky is our engineer today, and Tim Leninger is a theater reporter and reviewer in Connecticut. He's got a very successful podcast called One Man's Opinion, which you can find on YouTube, and you must be reviewing 2 or 3 shows a week.
On average, I actually did I'm reviewing more shows this season than I have ever, which is really nice. I am in the middle of working on episode 55 right now, which is my review of Goodspeed's Dreamgirls. And my show's seasons are based upon the theater season. So season 3 started in June, when the Broadway and the Connecticut theater season ended.
And so you're producing for that. You're writing features and reviews. Do you have any free time?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
There are periods where things are a little slower, like August is a little slower. January, February tends to be a little slower. But so I get to go on a vacation somewhere and kind of get away for a little bit.
When you go on vacation, do you see theater where you go, or do you put theater aside?
Only if it's something that really interests me. But yeah, I do tend to just unplug for a little while and kind of detach from theater if I can.
Yeah, this show ends towards the end of the year, and early in January, there's a thing called Broadway Week. For 2 weeks in New York, you can get half-price tickets to just about every Broadway show, subject to availability. You run back and forth to New York a lot. What's your favorite way to go, and what do you recommend for somebody that wants to go into the city and see a matinee?
Well, there are a few things to consider. One is, are you comfortable driving into the city? If you're not comfortable driving into the city, then you're taking the train or the bus. And if you're already paranoid about driving, you're probably paranoid about somebody else driving. So take the train. Take Metro North in. There's several different directions that lead into the city, depending upon where you're coming from. I take Metro North when I'm traveling alone because it's cheaper. It's right now you get on off hours when the congestion on the train is less. You can get round trip for $36.50 at the moment.
That's from New Haven, right?
That's from New Haven. Yeah, and it gets cheaper the closer into the city you are.
Should also add here that you can take CT Rail or Amtrak from Springfield to New Haven to connect with those trains, or Amtrak runs about 6 trains a day from Springfield into New York's Penn Station, which is one subway stop from the Broadway Theater District.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely true. And Penn Station's on 34th Street, which is literally an 8-block walk to 42nd Street. I mean, you can walk it. You don't need to even pay for the subway ticket. And I usually walk from Grand Central if I'm taking the train. But otherwise, I drive if I'm taking one or more other people with me because it's cheaper. You can usually find a garage in the theater district for about $30 for the whole evening. And when you account for tolls, you're paying less for the garage and tolls than you are for paying for 2 people round trip on the Metro North.
Yeah, and the other thing, there are some apps out there. Of course, I don't have them with me, but you can find apps where you can make a reservation in a garage. And
Spot Hero is the one that I use.
Yeah, and last year, a group of friends and I went to see Some Like It Hot in December, and made a reservation on the app at a theater next door to the Schubert Theater, got into the parking space, walked a half a block to the entrance to the theater, and then when the show was over, we only waited about 10 minutes to get our car to leave the city. The big
There's
thing
some garages where you can actually text them or call them ahead of time, and they'll bring your car out if you give them like a 10 minutes head notice.
Yeah, but I find the train very relaxing, particularly the Amtrak, because there's a cafe car and all of that. And if you don't want to pay to park in Springfield next door to Union Station, if you drive down to Windsor Locks, which is the first exit after you go over the Dexter Coffin Bridge, the Windsor Locks Amtrak / CT rail station has free parking. And you just leave your car, jump on the train, and the train is just so convenient.
Yeah, and also the same thing is true with Metro North in that because New Haven parking can be pretty expensive, New Haven Station. But if you just go to West Haven, which is the next stop in, it's only $6 all day during the week and free on the weekends. And if you go to Milford, which is the next stop, the train ticket is actually slightly cheaper and the parking is free from what I understand.
Do you have any places that you go to eat before Broadway shows that you can get a nice meal quickly?
Well, if you're looking for a quick meal, the thing is, when it comes to dining, I go everywhere. I am always out on the lookout for something good to eat, and I'm always trying different restaurants, whether it be something quick service or something high end, and everything in between. If I'm looking for something quick and easy, I've actually become a big fan of Gordon's Fish and Chips, Gordon Ramsay's quick service place that's on 44th Street, I believe, or 43rd Street, just off of Broadway, just east of Broadway. And yeah, you get some fish and chips. It's served pretty quickly, and the place is always full, but there's almost inevitably a table open. It's down to an art form there. I also like Black Iron Burgers, I think it's called. It's called Bib. It's right next door to Studio 54, and you get there's some great burgers if you want a kind of a pub atmosphere there, or the Playwrights Celtic Pub, or that's on 8th Avenue. I'll go there if I'm looking for something quick. If I'm wanting something a bit more sit down and enjoy some time with people, I like Becco's, which is a Italian place on Restaurant Row on 46th Street. If I want something fancier, Butter, which is Alex Cornicelli's restaurant on 44th Street. That's wonderful. It's on the east side. And I also am a fan of Chez Napoleon, which is a French place on 48th Street, I think, in Hell's Kitchen.
My favorite place of all times in New York for a quick bite before the theater was a Japanese restaurant called Kodama on 45th and 8th Avenue. I had lived in Hell's Kitchen when I was starting out, and it was my go-to for food, particularly between a matinee and an evening show when the place was dead. And then the matinees would break and the theater companies would show up. Dreamgirls was on Broadway, and Jennifer Holliday and Entourage would come have sushi every Wednesday afternoon. And I would go consistently. Well, unfortunately, they closed over the pandemic. And so I'm in search of new great food in the theater district. So anybody has any clues, put them in the comments on our YouTube thing. It would be great to know. We're going to take another break to acknowledge our underwriters, and we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the good things that happen in Connecticut and Massachusetts stages. Tim Leninger is our guest. I'm Mark Auerbach. Ken Stomsky is our chief engineer. And we'll be back after we acknowledge our underwriters, so don't go away.
Underwriting is brought to you by Boise Cascade Distribution, providing products and services needed for building material dealers, home improvement centers, and industrial customers. They offer everything from engineered wood and plywood to Drex decking and railing, James Hardy siding, and Advantech subfloor. Located at 33 Fowler Street Extension in Westfield and on the web at bc.com, they are committed to providing quality products, great service, convenience, and value.
This is Ken Stomsky from Ken's Den on WCPC 15 and 89.5 FM, Tuesdays, 8 to 10.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Ken Stomsky's our chief engineer. We're chatting with Tim Leninger, who's a Connecticut-based theater critic who covers Broadway and all things Connecticut, while I tend to cover all things Western Massachusetts and some Connecticut. And it's time to recap the year. Some of the theater milestones that took place this year, Hartford Stage and Goodspeed both celebrated their 60th anniversaries. Here in Western Massachusetts, we had a changing of the guard in a couple of theaters. Kristen Vangenhoven, who founded Wham Theater, has stepped down as the founding artistic director, and soon Wham will be announcing a new artistic director. And Barrington Stage Company, which is probably our most prolific producer of plays and musicals in the area, welcomed a new artistic director, Alan Paul, who replaced the retiring founder, Julianne Boyd. Under Alan Paul's direction, the theater mounted a stunning revival of the musical Cabaret, which swept the Berkshire Theater Critics Awards this year. And they also produced some wonderful other productions. Good work at Berkshire Theater Group, which had two new works. One, a musical called On Cedar Street, that is probably Broadway bound. Chester Theater has new artistic directorship with Tara Franklin and James Barry in the helm. Their opening production of the 2023 season moved off Broadway in New York. And looking south of the border to good things happening in Hartford, we've had prolific seasons by Theater Works, Hartford Stage, Playhouse on Park, and Broadway at the Bushnell. Tim, what are some of the milestones of area theater outside of Broadway that you experienced this year?
I think the best show for me that I think is going, that has potential to be New York bound, is Goodspeed's Summer Stock, which is based off of the film, and I loved it. And it was a good old fashioned classic musical song with big dance numbers and a fantastic score and some great performances. And that was a stellar show, just hands down. Everything about it was fantastic. I would love to see that be Goodspeed's new big thing that will go forward and make them lots of money and be very successful.
It's very similar.
Corbin Bleu is in it. He was fantastic.
Very similar to Holiday Inn, which they produced and went to New York, was a big success. It's being performed all over the country.
But that's what Goodspeed does. I mean, when they're hitting on all cylinders, it's on shows like this, because these are the kinds of shows that they really excel at.
I agree. I did not see very much this year, but a couple of weeks ago saw Moulin Rouge at the Bushnell. And the Bushnell's Broadway series this year is so incredibly huge when you think of the size of Moulin Rouge and the way it fit in the theater. And they've got Disney's Frozen coming this winter. And later on, a return visit to the 20-year-old Super Smash Wicked. These are big, big shows. And you forget that the Bushnell can handle the biggest shows on the road.
Oh yeah, well, it's a big house. Between the Bushnell and the Palace, and to a degree the Schubert down in New Haven, those are huge venues.
The Schubert was always known as the birthplace of America's hits. When I went to college in New Haven, there were pre-Broadway tours going through, there were post-Broadway tours going through, and it was a landmark in musical theater. I mean, Oklahoma started there. The King and I started there. And
Rodgers and Hammerstein just made it their home when it came to bringing in new stuff.
Now Goodspeed has sort of taken over that role of producing new musicals. Hartford Stage does on occasion. Barrington Stage sent On the Town to New York, and I sure hope that some of the work that they've done will make its way to New York City because they're doing great stuff.
I'd love to see another great production of On the Town. I mean, it's like, as I somewhat implied earlier, Leonard Bernstein's my favorite composer, and I love his stuff.
Have you seen Maestro yet?
I have not. It doesn't premiere here in Connecticut for another few days, another week or so, but it's on my must-see list.
Yeah, I mean, it was parts of it were filmed in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, they filmed at his home in Fairfield County.
Yeah, and they filmed at Tanglewood and where he lived and worked in Lenox and stuff like that. But there have been a lot of screenings here because of the local aspect of it.
Right.
And people that I know that saw the screening say that it's got Oscars written all over it. Not only for Bradley Cooper, who directed it and plays Bernstein, but for Carey Mulligan, who plays Bernstein's wife, Felicia Montalegre. And that it's a fascinating story unto itself.
Yeah, I'm currently reading right now the Bernstein Letters, which is a collection of correspondence that he had throughout his life. And it is a fantastic, I highly recommend it. It's a fascinating look into him as a person and how he felt about the people he wrote to and how they felt about him. It's wonderful.
I had one experience as a cub reporter. I think it was my third week working in radio, and they sent me to Tanglewood because it was a Bernstein birthday celebration in which he would be honored. And Lauren Bacall was like the MC, and portions of it were going to be filmed for public broadcasting. And I was working in the press room, and it was before the days when you had cell phones and, could just fax something in or email a review. And so I'm sitting there with the typewriter and a phone calling it in to the radio station by phone lines. He came in the press room, and he introduced himself, and I met him, and I was astounded. Knowing that he had written all this great theater music and was known as a conductor. I didn't know him as a conductor, but I knew about West Side Story and 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, a wonderful town on the town, and Candide. And here he was having this press room was the only place you could smoke, and he was a chain smoker and light up. And his host, Lauren Bacall, comes in for a cigarette. And I was astounded by being surrounded by such glamour, and I was very impressionable at that point in my career. I could not concentrate on my work. I was just staring at Lauren Bacall the whole time they were in there. But then you could hear the concert from the wings, and it was just a phenomenal experience. I've never forgotten it.
Yeah. And I unfortunately, I was too young to ever get the chance to meet him.
Well, he was at the tail end there, because I'm a little bit older than you. But I was in school in Washington when 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue tried out at the National Theater, and it was abominable. But it had two great stars in it. One was Ken Howard, who was known for a basketball series on television, and the other is Patricia Routledge, a British television star who has been on Masterpiece Theatre and all of these other British comedies. And there were a couple of great songs in it. And I'm glad to see that some of the music from that has been preserved, even though the show lasted, I believe, 4 previews in New York.
Yeah, no, I got a recording from the Yale Library, and I own a copy of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and the sound quality is horrible, but hey, I got it.
You got it. And one of his last things that he wrote was Mass, which was a music theater piece, which was originally done at the Kennedy Center, and I believe it opened the Kennedy Center in Washington. But a couple of years later was done in New Haven with a group of people from Yale and the New Haven Symphony and all of that. And the star of it was a young singer. I can't remember his first name. His last name was Hume. His father was the music reporter for the Washington Post. And this particular production got a lot of notoriety and a lot of coverage when it was in New Haven. And it was a brilliant piece of music. And thank God it's been recorded.
Mm-hmm. No, it's yeah. I can't talk enough about Bernstein, and I'm like I said, there's just something about his music that has always moved me and compelled me to want to love music more. That's hard to say about a composer, where it just motivates you want to discover more music, and really him and Beethoven are really the big two for me when it comes to just inspiring me anytime I listen to them.
How did you get into theater in the first place? Is that as an actor, as an audience member? What drew you to theater?
That goes back to the end of high school. I had some friends who were theater kids in high school, in Prescott High School in Prescott, Arizona. And I wasn't participating myself, but they were, and they kind of, so I got to know the community. And then when I went to college, I went to Central College of McPherson, Kansas. That was just like in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And I was an English major. And one of the requirements was to take a introduction to music theater as one of the prereq courses for the degree. And over time, back when I was in 5th grade, I started playing trumpet. So I was studying music all this time. So I was very well aware of music. And then I got cast in college in their production of Coppet and Yeston's Phantom. I was a ensemble person, and I ended up, and then the guy who was playing Elaine Cholet, Carlotta's husband, in that show, because Andrew Lloyd Webber's production, Carlotta doesn't have a husband that's present, but in this one there is, and I ended up filling in the role about 2 weeks before opening, and I had such a great time that I ended up performing theater. I ended up performing in every show I can get in over the next 2.5 years while I was still in Kansas. And then I studied musical theater at the American Music and Dramatic Academy in New York, which is home of alumni like Christopher Jackson and Tyne Daly and Jesse Tyler Ferguson. So I studied there for a couple years, finished there, and was working off and on as a opera performer and classical music performer in New York for about 10 years.
So that morphs into writing.
Yeah.
For a lot of us, I was in musical theater before, and then theater administration, and then theater reporter. So our career paths have sort of been similar in nature. Looking at the Hartford theater scene, which many of our people go to, what were some high points for you in Hartford?
Playhouse on Park's production of Bandstand is an immediate standout for me. I loved it, and it's one of those things where this doesn't happen at all. It's only happened 3 times in the times that I've been reviewing theater, in which I got thank you letters from the creators of a show. And the composer for Bandstand actually wrote me and thanked me for understanding some of the elements of the show that weren't necessarily normally addressed by either critics or press people in general, or observed by the audience, and that made me feel really good to get that kind of recognition for it. But yeah, Bandstand was a big standout for me. I really enjoyed Hartford Stage's Pride and Prejudice, and I'd seen that adaptation of Pride and Prejudice like 3 times now, and theirs was the one that really kind of got it right, or closest to it, that I felt that I really enjoyed it. Otherwise, and Playhouse on Park's Indecent. I really liked their production of Indecent earlier this year also, which I thought was really good.
I didn't review it, but I saw it, and I thought it was stunning.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't give Playhouse on Park enough credit for either their programming or their productions, but I think it's a theater to be reckoned with. They're in West Hartford. They do an eclectic mix of shows. They do musicals, they do comedies and dramas, they do some new works, and their creative team are just great people.
Yeah, they are, and I think that's part of the thing of why Playhouse on Park, TheaterWorks Hartford, and Hartford Stage are such wonderful institutions, is because all 3 of them know that they cannot be dependent on one thing. They have to diversify their product with new works, classic works, and also challenging works, reinventing older works to kind of challenge their audience, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, up here north of the border, Chester Theater is one that I've been a real admirer of. It's a very small space in the Chester Town Hall, probably seats 100 people. But James Barry and Tara Franklin have taken over the artistic management. And one of the things they did this year was they workshopped a brand new production by the actor Jay Sefton, who had co-starred in Wham/Berkshire Theater Group's co-production of the name of the play just dropped me, about the Constitution, what the Constitution means to me.
Yes.
And Jay wrote an autobiographical play called Unreconciled when he was a young altar boy and theater student growing up. A priest who was managing the theater program had abused several members of the theater company, himself included. And as an adult, he wrote a play about what happened and how he reconciled and came to terms with being the victim of abuse. It's a powerhouse of a play. It's a one-person performance, and it workshopped at Chester, and it was brought back to East Hampton City Space Theater this year, and it has aspirations of going somewhere big. Jay Sefton is a fabulous actor on his own terms. He's also a licensed therapist and works in a day job offering therapy to people who have suffered from abuse. But putting the 2 worlds together and writing this play was just dynamic. And I hope that Jay's play finds a bigger audience either in New York or on film or television where it really belongs. The metamorphosis of Barrington's stage company with new artistic director Alan Paul was something to be reckoned with. Alan Paul brought a variety of new programs and new performances in. He did the rarely performed William Finn musical, A New Brain. William Finn has been paramount into discovering and ramping up a cabaret series at Barrington Stage. One theater space is named for him. He's a part-time resident of the Berkshires. Cabaret, which opened the season, was a stunning production on every possible level. And they produce annually in the wintertime the 10 by 10 New Play Festival, which is 10 10-minute plays done in February and March with an ensemble of 6 people. It's one of the most fun theater-going things ever. So Barrington has done well. And Berkshire Theater in Stockbridge and Pittsfield has pivoted from the tried and true to new works in a lot of ways, along with Great Barrington Public Theater. So a lot of the theater offerings north of the Pike have been new works, and it's been exciting. But at the same time as seeing new works, you get to see some, Chestnuts. Berkshire Theater Group's fall production was Michael Frayn's Copenhagen, which is so appropriate in that it's two scientists discussing nuclear war at the same time the movie Oppenheim came out. So a lot of the new works that are being produced have potential to go elsewhere, and they're also very relevant to what's going on in our time. We're going to take a quick break to acknowledge our underwriters, and we'll be back with more of this year-end recap with Tim Leninger and myself. Ken Stomke's our chief engineer. We'll be right back.
Underwriting support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Greater Westfield Chamber of Commerce, the voice of business for the Greater Westfield communities. Informing, educating, advocating, the Chamber provides opportunities for members to make meaningful connections on local, regional, and state levels. For more information on the Chamber's many events, workshops, and programs, as well as the benefits of membership, visit westfieldbiz.org. The Chamber focuses on the most important economy, yours.
Hi, this is Harry Rock, host of Rock on Westfield every fourth Wednesday at 8 a.m. Tune in for my view of this place I call home.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm Mark Auerbach. Ken Stomsky is our chief engineer today. My guest is Tim Leninger, who is a theater critic and writer in Connecticut, whose podcast, One Man's Opinion, which I faithfully watch on YouTube every week, is a real recap of reviews of shows in Connecticut and Broadway and off-Broadway. And Tim, I applaud the work that you're doing and the accessibility of the writing and the podcasts that you do. It's one of my favorites.
Thank you. And I've also got a new show called Yesterday's Matinee, which is a classic film podcast that is done a bit more irregularly. Where I sit down with three friends and we talk about classic film. It's got its own website, so you can look that up as yesterdaysmatinee.com, and it's also on Spotify.
Well, if you ever need somebody to talk about old movies, you can count me in.
Okay.
I mean, I love old movie musicals and disaster movies. I love disaster movies, like Earthquake or The Poseidon Adventure or The Towering Inferno, that kind of stuff. The campier it is, the more I like it.
We've done one musical so far, and that's Danny Kaye's The Court Jester.
Great movie.
Yeah.
What do you think were the high points at Hartford Stage this year? Because Hartford Stage is the major Connecticut theater in our area.
Well, I think Pride and Prejudice was their high point. I think that was the best show of the season for them. And I'd have to... And when I was making notes of shows that I saw this year, that was the one from them that really stood out for me. I can tell you what I am looking forward to over there is that their production of Christmas Carol is back, and I am thrilled with that because that was the show that I worked on. I actually worked backstage for 2 years on that show.
I was glad to see it come back. By the time this show airs, I think that Christmas Carol is over. But it was one of their benchmarks every year. And I was so disappointed when they paused it during the pandemic and brought back or I shouldn't say brought back, but produced for a couple of seasons, the It's a Wonderful Life radio play. Now, I come from the world of radio, and I love seeing live radio done with sound effects and all of that. Mm-hmm. But as well as they did with that, for me, it was a disappointment because A Christmas Carol is so full of special effects and flashing stuff like that.
It's everything that theatricality, that it is the pinnacle of theater for me.
It is for me too. Effects. And it's a great theater piece to take young people to, introduce them to theater.
I should say that talk about other earlier productions of theirs. Their production of Trouble in Mind I really liked, which is a hard play to do because it kind of comes from the past, and it wasn't really something that something that was supposed to go to Broadway like 60, 70 years ago, and it didn't, and it finally did a couple of years ago, and Harper Stage had brought it back. I think that I really liked that production. That was a good show.
Yeah, I mean, in the new era of Nelia Ben Susan, I liked Kiss My Aztec a lot, and I really hope that it goes to Broadway. It's supposedly going, and
Right.
there. If you read, it's listed as upcoming in a lot of the theater websites, but no opening date. So I'm not sure
yeah.
it's going to make it this year, or
Well,
whether it'll be
that's like
next.
their production of Rear Window with Kevin Bacon. That was supposed to go to Broadway also, and it never did.
Yeah,
I think Kiss My Aztec. I think it needs an off-Broadway work first. I think it needs a little bit more development.
I
But
agree. It's not totally ready, but I would assume that they would have it ready by the time it gets there. I also really liked Melia's interpretation of Ah Wilderness. And there were a couple of performances in it that were stunning. One of them was Katerina McCrimmon, who was picked out of nowhere after Ah Wilderness, and she's starring as Fanny Bryce in the national tour of Funny Girl and getting rave reviews all over the country. And that's coming to the Bushnell this spring.
I wasn't a fan of All Wilderness. I think her 12th Night was amazing.
I can't tell you why I liked Our Wilderness, but
Or no, not 12th Night. Winter's Tale.
Yeah.
It was a Winter's Tale. I really loved her Winter's Tale. But yeah, All Wilderness didn't do it for me.
yeah, and I generally like everything that TheaterWorks does. Although I've missed most of their shows this year. Christmas on the Rocks is my favorite go-to for the holidays, and some of the other works they do, like the musical Lizzie, which just opened their season this year, that was fun.
It was good. I liked Lizzie. It does have some problematic themes, I feel, particularly when we're trying to make in the hashtag Me Too world. I think we need to support women and who go through trauma, but I think we need to be careful as to how far we celebrate that, particularly when you talk about someone who was accused of being as murderous as she was. I'm always touchy when it comes to. It's almost like Assassins. It's like where do you draw the line between telling an important story about horrible people and celebrating them? I mean, that's Lizzie kind of walks that line very close for me.
She does, but you know what's interesting? Here you have this brutal murder in Fall River, and the characters have been turned into a musical or a rock opera like Lizzie, and also into a ballet, American Ballet Theater, Fall River Legend, which was an Agnes DeMille piece, is legendary in the world of ballet to tell the story of Lizzie Borden. Who knew that a girl with an axe could make it in musical theater and ballet all at the same time?
Well, there's a play called that I saw at Bedlam Theater off Broadway called Fall River Rising, which was also about Lizzie Borden, and that one's kind of existential in its representation. It's a bizarre little piece.
Well, we only got a minute or two here left. If you could have a theater resolution for our area theaters for 2024, what do you think they can do to better what they put out there on stage, and what would you like to see them do?
Two things. Know your limits. Don't do shows that can't fit in your theater. That is a big no-no, and some of them are reaching for the stars and they're reaching too far. And the other one is don't be nepotistic. It's like if you run the theater, the last thing you want to do to impress everybody is to cast yourself in everything. Don't do that. It's a big no-no for me.
I agree. The other thing is, I think that as the theater world is striving to be more inclusive and to be more diverse and equitable in terms of the people that they're hiring and the plays they're putting on stage, both from the playwrights to the acting and the design and creative team, don't forget that the audience doesn't move forward as fast as the creative. And you don't want to leave people that were supporters and followers for many years left out because they don't get what you're putting on stage, and don't preach to them. That's the most important thing to me. I really believe in equity, inclusiveness, and diversity on every level. But when I feel preached to going to the theater, it really is bothersome for me. So I hope people that are the producers will be more open-minded. Just put the play on. Don't come preaching about it in your promotional materials, and don't stand up there and pat yourself on the back before the performance, because they're going to teach you a lesson about inclusiveness. Just do the play.
Yeah, if the theater, if the show is good, the show will speak for itself.
Exactly. Tim Leninger, we're out of time. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
To
Always
wrap
a
up the
pleasure.
year, Ken Stomsky's been our chief engineer, and we're rolling into the holiday season. So from the staff here at Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB, all best wishes for a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Ken Stomsky's been our engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll see you soon with another all-new edition of Artsbeat. Have a great weekend.
If I had 3 wishes for Christmas, I'd make my first wish for a tree. I'd make my second for a gift from someone, a remembrance from one who is dear to me. I'd make my third for a snowball, and if my 3 wishes came true, on Christmas night I would light my tree, the snow falling silently, and open my Christmas present from you. I'd make my third for a snowball, and if my 3 wishes came true, on Christmas night I would light my tree, the snow falling silently, and open my Christmas present